Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Josie's Point of View, where we focus on human interest stories from the Carolinas and beyond. Today it's Wednesday and it's January the 15th, 2025. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're new to my channel, I want to thank you so much for stopping by. I hope you find the information here to be informative. And if you're a return viewer, by all means, thank you for coming back. I always say the tide changes so frequently here on these YouTube streets. So you always have to acknowledge where your support comes from. And I want you to know I sincerely thank you for your support. Feel free to like or to share this video. And don't forget to subscribe. And our story today comes from the Marine Corps base at Camp Lejeune here in North Carolina. Take a look at the headline. And it reads, North Carolina Marine sentenced to 8 years for killing a fellow Marine. I'll provide you with a summary here, and I'll identify some of my sources for you in the description box. Well, a few months ago, I shared with you the story of a young Marine from Camp Lejeune who was facing a court-martial for the shooting and killing of a fellow Marine. Now, back then, very little information was made available to the public, but we did know that a court-martial was scheduled for the first week of November, this past November 2024. Now, we're not sure whether or not that court-martial did indeed take place because we know eventually there was a guilty plea that was entered. But nonetheless, last week there was an update that this individual, this Marine, had been sentenced. So we have a little bit more information. So my goal today is to update you on the case and to share with you not only the sentencing, but also the reaction from the victim's family. So let's go back in time briefly to when this incident took place. It was on October the 18th, 2023, when this was the headline from the Public Affairs Office at Camp Lejeune Marine Corps Base. It stated, on-base homicide, suspect in custody. And here's the content of that message. It reads, at approximately 10:15 p.m. this evening, base law enforcement authorities apprehended a Marine suspected of involvement in the death of another Marine. The incident occurred in an on-base barracks room earlier this evening. Further details will be provided as they become available, and it listed a point of contact. And beyond that brief announcement, I never really saw anything else from Camp Lejeune. The bulk of my information or my familiarity with this case came from the Marine Corps Times or the local newspaper. So let's begin with an identification of the deceased. He was identified as 19-year-old Lance Corporal Austin Brian Schwenk, hometown, Ohio. The report stated he was born in Onslow County, but he graduated high school in Ohio. He was an electro-optical ordnance repairer assigned to Camp Lejeune 2nd Battalion, 6th Marine, 2nd Marine Division. I'm sure you can tell by his age that this was his first assignment. In fact, he entered the military right after graduating high school, completed his boot camp at Parris Island in South Carolina, and then was assigned to Camp Lejeune. I saw a report that stated he had been promoted to Lance Corporal on August the 1st, and as you know by now, he died on October the 18th, just about 2.5 months later. Now let's return to when the incident actually took place in October 18, 2023. Now, we learned the following day that the suspect was already in custody. He was identified as the Marine Corporal Jesse Bob, and of course, he was later charged. Now, specifics regarding the incident were never made public. All we knew is that Corporal Bob would eventually be facing murder and manslaughter charges. And a few months later, it was disclosed that he would be facing a general court martial, which was eventually scheduled to begin on November the 4th, 2024. Now, it was reported that Corporal Bob's defense team had been advocating for an involuntary manslaughter plea as opposed to the charge of murder. This was their position because they claimed the shooting that took the place of that Lance Corporal, they claimed that it was simply an accident attributed to negligence, and of course the fact that Bob had been drinking, something we did not know about previously, but they felt that the fact that he was drinking contributed to this act of negligence. And sometimes before the scheduled court martial date in November, um, Bob and his attorney were successful in having that charge of murder thrown out for the lesser charge of involuntary manslaughter, and they entered a plea of guilty. Now, as part of the guilty plea, based on my experience, the service member is required to address the court, speak on the plea, and outline the facts of the case and why he is indeed guilty. This means he must provide a truthful recollection of the incident. Now, I'm not sure when this was done, but I know it was done. We just don't know when. So here's a recollection of those events as reported by one of the major news sources covering military news. It was based on a summary outlined by Bob's attorney, but it was provided to the media by a third party who was involved in the case, and this is what was documented. They say that both Bob and the deceased Marine were assigned to the same battalion, and they both worked in the armory. And for those of you who don't know, an armory is a place that has guns, lots of guns. And one of the things that you do learn is gun safety rules. Now, that evening, Bob entered the deceased Marine's room, which was in the barracks. It was Wallace Creek Barracks on the base. Bob had a firearm in his hand, and he had been drinking. Now, while in the other Marine's room, Bob placed he placed a firearm at his head in what was documented as a suicidal joke. I take that to mean he really was not making a suicide threat. He was just being stupid. Okay, he was simply playing around. Then Bob changed his position and he pointed a handgun at the deceased Marine and he pulled the trigger. Now, I'm in no position to speak on his intent, and that was not mentioned. It simply states he pointed the gun and he pulled the trigger, killing that fellow Marine. They say Bob screamed and fled the scene, and as already mentioned, he was apprehended several hours later. Now, last week I also saw this headline, and I believe it was on Facebook, but it was from one of the military newspaper, the Marine Corps Times. It was dated January the 8th, 2025, and it spoke on the case. And the headline essentially was that Corporal Jesse Bob had pled guilty to involuntary manslaughter in the killing of his fellow Marine. Not only did they address the case, I believe it stated that a meeting was held before the judge a few days earlier, but definitely this year, January 2025. Not only did it address the involuntary manslaughter guilty plea, it also spoke about the sentence. And that sentence was 8 years of confinement, a dishonorable discharge, and a reduction in grade to E1. Now, I did not see any mention for credit for time served, but he had been locked up for almost little over a year and a few months. So it's very possible that that time would be taken out of the 8 years that he has been sentenced to. And the reaction from the deceased soldier's family? Simply shock and outrage. Most of all, they feel betrayed by the military justice system. They feel let down by a system that imposed such a minimal sentence on a person who took the life of their loved one. Now, they did not approve of this plea agreement. They wanted Bob to face a murder charge. But so in their eyes, this is still justice being denied. The victim's mother said that she was still in shock. She believed her son had barely served 19 years of his life, and Bob's sentence should be nothing less than that. But we've learned that within the terms of the negotiated plea agreement, the jail time was between 3 years to 8 years of confinement. 8 years was the maximum sentence, and it appears that this is what the judge did in making his ruling. He did impose the maximum sentence under that plea agreement. Now, I am sure this was explained to the family, but you know, when you're grieving and you already believe that what's being done is unfair, it's probably difficult for you to hear. Now, the father's love and admiration for his son was expressed throughout the interaction with the media. He believed all his son ever wanted to do was become a Marine, just like his father had done. So you have a father's pride as his son following in his footsteps. In reflecting on the case and the plea agreement, the father said there's just no excuse for what happened, especially since Bob worked in the armory and he knew gun safety rules. He said as a father, the way he see it, his son was executed. He said he wanted to see a minimum sentence of 15 years That's what he felt his son deserved, but it was denied. The father said that since his son's death, he has suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. He has a lot of grief and sadness and is having difficulty moving on. He's still holding on to the past, and he's just holding on to those memories and the future that he had envisioned for his child. And this is the part that touched me in a very special way. Dad told the news media that he looked forward to the day when he would pin his corporal stripes on his son, but he had to settle for having a member of his family read a promotion script, and he pinned the stripes on his son's uniform as he lay in a casket before being cremated. I simply could not hold back the tears. Well, you may have noticed that my tone, my approach has changed. And sometimes it just happens when you're creating videos. You don't always end the same way you started. So I want to end this video with a few words for a grieving father and a fellow veteran. I am so very sorry for your loss. Right now, it's very difficult for me to hold back the tears because living with PTSD can be challenging. And it's not always easy to deal with the pain and the grief that comes along with it. Believe me, I do understand. But I want to encourage you to seek counseling so that you and the rest of your family can continue to cherish the memories of your fallen hero, your pride, and your joy. No one really knows how long this grieving process will take, but there are resources available to guide you through the step by step through the different stages. And don't forget that there are other ones in your family who are still there and they need your time and attention. Remember that grieving does not mean that you fail to live a productive life. You can do both at the same time. But I want you to know that seeking help is a very good way to cherish your son's memory because in a time of when there is a trying circumstances, that is exactly what you would have advised him to do. So if you have not done so already, I want to encourage you to seek counseling and get the help and support that you deserve for not just you, but for your family. And that's all I have for you right now. Feel free to leave me a comment below and let me know what you think about this video. And by all means, feel free to like it and to share it. And if you haven't done so already, I want to invite you to subscribe to my channel by clicking on that red subscribe button. It's on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And if you click on the bell that looks just like this one, that's the notification bell. If you click on that notification bell, you'll be the first to know whenever a new video is uploaded. I thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.